What I thought I would do is we try and shift. I mean, of course, everything we're talking about is so comprehensive. It's all connected. I'm supposed to be talking about land use and transportation, yet it feels to me like we've been addressing that issue for quite a bit this morning. So I'm going to be a little bit more strategic maybe in my comments, and first try and put some of the problem statements out there, and then throw out a few ideas also. In terms of land use, I think we're all very familiar with the problems that we're facing. As was said earlier this morning, and it was actually heartening to see that New Jersey voters get it, property tax reform went absolutely nowhere. We didn't even scratch the surface on the issue. The State Development and Redevelopment Plan, which I spent a couple of years of my own life and have the scars to prove it working on, is pretty much functionally defunct. I think it's really not going anywhere and hasn't really achieved much lately. The Highlands Comprehensive Management Plan is very exciting, and we have high hopes for it, but it certainly is facing enormous hurdles. COA has come out with their Round 3 rules. They're facing the lawsuits. We have eliminated the regional contribution agreements and moved to a growth share. All may be positive developments, and yet at the same time there seems to be, especially in the current financial situation that we find ourselves, really significant concern. I don't know. I almost ask for a show of hands or use your sensors. How many people think that we'll actually get 116,000 units of affordable housing anytime soon? And into all this context, in terms of the failure of the very progressive public policies that we've put out there, I would say that the state is becoming, and this is also a more underlying problem that we have, is that we're seeing a polarization of the different interest groups. We're seeing developers and environmentalists, I would say, get further and further apart on what on their basic observations and beliefs about the way the state is set up. Planners, we find ourselves somewhere in the middle, as Diane, I'm sure, will agree. We find ourselves torn between the poles, not sure which way to go. And it seems to be that any kind of common ground or coming up with solutions for this is disappearing. So there are enormous concerns on land use. In terms of transportation, probably everyone in this room already knows, but it's worth repeating, the Transportation Trust Fund is going broke. Within a year or two, we will start spending 30 years' worth of collecting gas tax revenues just to pay off the interest on the bonds on money that's already been spent. It jeopardizes our federal funding. It creates enormous concerns. Probably the toll increases that were approved last week are too small. And didn't even do anything. And this was just about really putting something out there to make sure that we could pay for access to the Regions Core, which I'll talk about later. We just don't seem to have. Jack Latier, I thought, was very eloquent this morning talking about the lack of vision. But there doesn't seem to be a will to find the funding, the stable, recurring and increasing over time funding that we need for this. And there's an enormous disconnect between public expectations and the needs that we have for this. In New York, we have a very sophisticated system for dealing with it. I call it the pizza doctrine, which is that people kind of understand that the price of a subway token and a slice of pizza are roughly equivalent. And people understand that. Somehow in New Jersey, there's this expectation that the tolls should stay flat, should have remained flat for the last decade and should stay flat moving out there in the future. And all of these issues, frankly, I'm sorry to be such a downer here, but when you put them into the national context, you see these things even aggravated even further. Obviously, the financial situation, we are entering a scary new situation, trying to figure out of what the Wall Street, how many banks are we going to have left, what kind of employment are we going to have, and where are our tax revenues going to come from. At the same time, the United States is in a unique situation in the entire world. We are a modern, mature, older infrastructure nation that is growing at the same time. Rather than the old Europe or the Asian tigers, we find ourselves stuck somewhere in the middle. There was quite a lot of press recently when we passed 300 million Americans. By 2050, the expectation is we will have 420 million Americans. The growth from 2000 to 2050 will be roughly the same as we saw from 1950 to 2000 in this country. From 1950 to 2000, we had built this infrastructure system, this interstate highway system, that accommodated that growth out in our growing metropolitan regions and suburbanization and all the things that occurred from it. But what is going to create the infrastructure? How are we going to create the capacity for that next 120 million or so Americans, or 20 million who are going to move into the Northeast megaregion, the Boston to Washington corridor that we find ourselves in the middle of? How is the United States going to find the $1.6 trillion that's estimated simply to bring our infrastructure up to a state of good repair? And of course, and I'm kind of amazed it hasn't come up yet this morning, but climate change and the imperative of that, and figuring out how to deal in climate change, which is going to impact New Jersey in enormous ways. How are we going to start to think about, rejigger our thinking to address those kinds of issues? So, sorry, that's a bit of a downer, but I want to put those problem statements out there clearly. In terms of proposals, I have kind of two philosophies. One is the KISS, keep it simple, stupid, and what I call radical incrementalism. I don't believe, as much as John Shore's lunch of cow enchiladas sounds good, I don't believe that we're going to just rejigger the entire thing overnight. Don't tell me you're going to cut my property taxes in half. I would be really happy with some kind of system that would stop the unbelievable and out-of-control growth that we have. In terms of transportation, we've got to find more funding. And it's going to be all of the above. We've got to increase the gas taxes, probably switch to a sales tax. We've got to think about tolling, privatization of some sort. In Hong Kong and Asia, development happening on infrastructure systems has a real public-private partnership where the public sector generates fees over time and has capitalized to the tune of $10 billion in Hong Kong. We're going to have to build access to the region's core. It's a $7+ billion project. But overnight, it essentially doubles, and I'm running out of time, the transit capacity of the state of New Jersey, which is an incredible benefit to us. The rest of the country would die to have one project that would double the transit system, and essentially access to the region's core does that. Midtown Direct added, studies have shown, about $100,000 in value to every home within a half mile of a train station on it. $100,000 in value without any policy or planning put into it. ARC could do something similar to that. We need a national investment strategy. $13 billion was approved, authorized by Congress 2 weeks ago for Amtrak. We need to be pushing on those areas. In land use, we should be thinking about smart zoning. Again, incremental reform. Hold harmless communities in terms of their local finances, inclusionary zoning, site standards. I'm about to get the bell. I thought I had 10 minutes. Did I get 10 minutes? I did.
Tom? Stay here. Stay here. All right. Let's do some quick voting. If you think, the question Tom posed at the outset, that New Jersey is actually going to get its 116,000 units of COA housing, affordable housing, if you think that's going to happen, vote yes, 1. If you don't, no, going to. Will. It will happen. Vote yes, 1. It won't happen. Vote 2, no. Do we switch between sources there, guys? It's hung up again. Tom, you're dismissed. All right. Huh? Yeah. Show of hands. We're going to get them. Raise your hand. We're back to where we were this morning before some of you got here. The system hung up, so we vote by raising our hands. It will happen. We will get 116,000 units of affordable housing. Raise your hand. You think it will happen. You don't think it will happen. Okay. On transportation funding, gas tax should go up. Yes, raise your hand. No. Okay, you guys are the ones who voted in that 13% earlier. I know that. Tolls should go up. No. Okay. Sales tax should go up for transportation funding. Ooh, that was way down. No. Okay. Not in my backyard, they said. And fees for developers should go up. No. That was closer. Okay, we're back to the sort of speed dating part of the program. And the first person to kick that off is going to be Barbara Heisler-Williams, who is the Executive Director of the Fund for an Open Society. Barbara.
National leaders can do this. I can do a shout out, right, to my LNJ03 guys. So New Jersey needs to be a leader in development and support of healthy, stably, racially integrated communities to provide a model for the rest of the country as we move to a more diverse populace and to benefit all of the residents of our diverse state. Key to this issue is how we view housing. Housing as a set of interrelated structures that includes both the building of housing and the attainment of safe, stable housing. So housing as shelter is a basic human need, but housing is far more complex than that. It's wrapped up with regional markets, consumer preferences, social status, racism, exclusionary zoning, and many other issues. We need to be thinking of developing communities that promote interacting populations of various kinds of individuals. An ideal community would be designed to promote that very idea with a wide range of economic, social, and age backgrounds. This kind of diversity, coupled with the compact and walkable scale of neighborhoods, would provide people with an opportunity to interact with their neighbors, create relationships across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines, and share power and involvement in community activities and leadership. In today's global economy, a metropolitan region must harness the productive capacities of all of its residents, businesses, and institutions in order to stay competitive, sustainable, vibrant, and healthy. Our communities need to be incented to act in ways that promote integration. So I'd like to propose the adoption of an integration impact assessment along the lines of an environmental impact assessment that would allow us to clearly see and to measure the outcomes of our planning decisions, our investment actions, and our legislation. Communities working to support integration would get fast-tracked on their development plans. They would get high-level assistance on their planning needs. They would get financial rewards for working pro-integratively. School districts that serve a wide diversity, read whites and children of color, would be rewarded and supported in their effort to develop children who would be leaders in our increasingly diverse and global economy. And that's it.
All right, so Barbara, we can sum that up by saying there would be the creation of something called an integration impact assessment along the lines of what you all see all the time as EISs, basically, right? And that would involve rewards for communities that rated well, ranging from fast track status to actual financial rewards. Is that a fair summation?
It is.
Okay, you're in favor? Oh, we're back up, so we don't have to do the hands thing anymore. We're back to voting. So vote. 5-1. 5 is good, 1 is bad. And the survey says, okay. All right. Thanks. Next speaker is Dr. Richard Goldstein. He's the president of the New Jersey Council of Teaching Hospitals. And Richard, you are on.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for inviting me to speak to you all this morning. I'm a physician. I'm former commissioner of health. I'm currently the CEO of the Council of Teaching Hospitals and spent the last 25 years working in healthcare policy. And I wanted to discuss 5 areas of healthcare that I think I know for sure. The first is that children's hospitals in New Jersey are much better than the public knows. There are 10 of them. They're all certificated, and they're all teaching hospitals. And they can do most everything that the great regional centers can do in Philly and New York. 95% of the cases should stay in New Jersey. And there's a financial impact when these children leave the state to our institutions. Our children's hospitals need that financial support in order to do the things that they do even better. And we need to get the message out. The second area is that New Jersey needs to have more fellowships. Medical education works in the sense that after graduating medical school, a student picks a hospital or a healthcare system and does a residency, usually for 3 or 4 years, Some go into practice at that point, internal medicine, OB surgery, et cetera, but many more go on to train, and that additional post-residency programs are called fellowships. Our residents that train in New Jersey, by and large, don't stay here. And the number one reason they don't stay here is because those fellowships, those additional training opportunities are not here. It also affects the quality of our residents that do come to New Jersey, because the better residents nationwide will want to train in institutions that have fellowship programs. And ultimately, it affects the quality of the physician supply that we have in New Jersey. Now, fellowships are not supported by Medicare and Medicaid funding the way most of GME works, so that fellowships need their own special attention. Third, health care, and this is no great shock to you, is too expensive. The best bet for reducing costs and improving quality is a massive investment in information technology. And it would be a healthy use, I believe, to use the proposed Blue Cross conversion funds to really have a serious effort in IT. This would include physician order entry, personal medical records, decision support, which means how doctors make diagnoses, as well as a massive data warehousing, data mining effort so we can actually figure out what really works well. Fourth, I want to point out that if we do not address tort reform eventually, we will have no obstetricians left in the state of New Jersey within 10 years. Virtually none of the residents that train in OB stay here, and they all cite medical malpractice as the number one reason they don't. So that we will eventually end up with a system of nurse practitioners caring for the mom before birth, the prenatal care, and we'll have a new version. Instead of hospitalists, we'll have obstetricianists delivering babies around the clock. My final point is that we need to have a hug campaign around UMDMJ. UMDMJ is absolutely vital to the success of graduate medical education in the state of New Jersey. We need to find ways to make them much more successful. We need to find ways to add medical schools to our state, because we're going to need those future physicians. We need more affiliations with UMDMJ, more research, and all the good things that come from having a really strong state university. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not sure how to do the first one, Richard. Keep the children's hospital stuff here. It has economic impact. I don't know that I can make that something susceptible to what you would vote on.
No. I think the question is, do we need to do more to get the word out?
Okay. So a better communications effort geared toward explaining the quality of the care for children that we have here relative to what people might migrate to get across one of the two major rivers. Okay, you're in favor of that kind of marketing or communications effort. 5, you're not. 1, go. Okay, number 2. Fellowships are not paid for by Medicare or Medicaid. We don't have what we need here to keep the residents here. They don't come here as residents because they know they're not going to get those kinds of fellowship opportunities. So it would be some kind of increase in funding for fellowship opportunities.
We need to find a mechanism to fund them, yes.
Okay, so funding for fellowship opportunities for New Jersey residents, as in medical residents, not as in us folks. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Number 3. The cost of health care leads to the notion that we need an increase in funding for the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure behind the medical establishment in New Jersey. Take the Blue Cross funds, the conversion funds, and put them to work doing all kinds of things, from personal medical records to the other things that Dick listed, which I've forgotten already, but you get the idea. You're in favor of using those Blue Cross funds that way? 5, you're not. 1, go. Okay. Number 4, it's tort reform or medical malpractice, whatever you want to call it. So if you want somebody to be able to deliver your baby in New Jersey, no. You're basically in favor of some form of tort reform. We don't go through the whole thing, but you get the idea. You understand what Richard was talking about. So if you are in favor there, 5. If it is not a compelling issue for you, 1. Vote. Okay.
Well.
And finally, it's kind of like a Sarah Palin shout out. It's a hug for UMDNJ. It's doing whatever might be appropriate. I'm not trying to trivialize it, but how do we basically add medical school capacity in New Jersey? How do we take advantage of, support, reinforce whatever the standing that UMDNJ has? Is that sort of a fair summation? So we'll call it, for purposes of our voting, a hug for UMDNJ. You want that? It's a 5. You're not persuaded. It's a 1. Vote. Okay, you guys like UMDNJ. They'll all be thrilled in Newark. Thank you, Richard. All right, the next person on our list is the chair of the New Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. That's Susan Zellman.
Good morning or good afternoon. In these times of economic constraints, I ask you, what perhaps is the most important investment we can make in our state's future? An efficient network of modern transportation infrastructure. In these times of economic uncertainty, increased investment in transportation makes more sense than ever. In the short run, the spending has a significant impact. U.S. DOT estimates that each $1 billion spent on infrastructure creates 47,000 jobs. The long-term impacts are even more important. Think of transportation network as a circulation of the entire body of our economy. If it's not working efficiently, our economic health suffers in many ways. Production is lost. Deliveries of goods can't be made. Businesses are considering locating elsewhere. And crushing and crumbling bridges, antiquated interchanges, and transit with limited capacity cannot form the foundation of a strong economy that we so direly need. Despite its problems, our transportation system has great advantages. And our system is in dire need, though, of repair and provides a great range of transportation options that many people in the parts of the country simply don't have. It's logical for businesses to want to locate here, right in the middle of the nation's richest consumer market with a skilled and educated workforce. Just as we need to rethink the taxes and the regulations that drive businesses out of New Jersey, we need to reimagine our transportation system so that it continues to attract businesses and economic activity, taking advantage of our location and making our state the logical choice for business. So where do we begin? Well, first we need to increase targeted investments to expand transit and rail. We've long recognized the need of additional rail. We're including the tunnel to the Hudson River under the region's core. We need to look at intermodal connections that move in passengers and freight from origin to destination. But what's most important is that we need to cooperate and communicate. We need a statewide transportation plan that is involving the entire state. At the NJTPA, elected officials of both parties work together to formulate funding decisions for the 13 northernmost counties. Our bipartisan approach can serve as a model on how the state should approach transportation investment. Our legislature is sitting on either side of the aisle, constantly bickering as to what our solutions are. We need to put aside partisan divisions and work together to develop an agenda for transportation investment in the state and a plan to pay for it. By looking beyond partisanship and working across the aisle, we can ensure objective planning and is rewarded with adequate funding. Our legislature must act soon to create dedicated long-term renewal of our state transportation trust fund. I agree with Tom. However, we need to also ensure that funding decisions are based on a cost-benefit analysis, not necessarily pork barrel decisions, and other objective decisions. Just as it's critical for legislators to work together, we must get agencies to work together in the government. We have much needed cooperation on all agencies. The DOT, Transit, and the DEP, the Office of Smart Growth, the DCA, COA, and others all have seemingly conflictingly objectives. They need to work together, not with competing objectives. So infrastructure projects are investments that pay dividends over time in the form of jobs, economic activity, and business development. This critically important principle should be a common ground and should start with Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, with a bipartisan task force committed to that premise and to focus on a transportation master plan that is statewide. Transportation infrastructure that is so needed to increase jobs, and we need a plan that all agencies can endorse to help preserve our economic future.
Okay. Increase in transportation funding for transportation infrastructure, specifically transit and rail. So if you think transit and rail deserve, I guess, a bigger share of the pie than they're currently getting, you would vote a 5. And if that's not a priority for you, you would vote somewhere down the line on that little tiny Likert scale. So vote. Oh, transportation and rail got a resounding shout-out from you guys. I'm not sure what to do with intermodal connections. Do I ask them if they're in favor of them?
No, it's kind of all blended.
Okay.
Yeah.
However, a statewide transportation plan. So you are the chair of the New Jersey Transportation Planning Authority?
The North Jersey.
North Jersey. Okay, I was going to be like,
13.
I was going to do that parochial South Jersey thing for a moment, but I won't do that.
It's 13 northern counties.
The 13 northern counties. That's why I was going to ask you. All right, so a statewide version of what those guys are doing is basically what you think is a good idea. You give it a 5. If you don't, you're down that scale toward 1 somewhere.
Including DOT and transit.
Including DOT and transit, and including the money to pay for what they plan for, right? Okay, there you go. I think it's probably also motherhood and apple pie with a little vanilla ice cream on it. There you go. 2/3 of the people say yes, but you're way up on the upper end there. And then 2 other things I wrote down. Funding for the Transportation Trust Fund. I'm going to guess you guys are all going to vote for that without saying exactly where it's coming from, but let's just do it.
Well, actually, I'm looking for bipartisan approach for the Transportation Trust Fund. That's maybe a little bit more difficult to achieve.
Okay. But these guys are going to be in favor of anything that's bipartisan. That's like saying, the devil should not be invited to lunch or something. All right. Bipartisan support for the Transportation Trust Fund renewal, funding for the Transportation Trust Fund. You're in favor of a bipartisan approach? Yes? No? Yes, 1? No, 2? I'm sorry. I take that all back. It's my fault. We're going back to the 5. You guys are not willing to change on the run, I can tell. We're back to the 5-point scale. 5, you're in favor of it. 1, you're not in favor of it. Boy, it got nasty really quick. I thought you were all asleep. All right, there we go. And finally, the concept that all those alphabet agencies that were mentioned should work together. Or as Rodney said in L.A., can't we all just get along? All right? We won't vote on that one. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, next on the list is Vince Giordano, who is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Education Association.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and to be a part of this program, and it's been a very interesting one, I might say. I know this is going to be charged against my time, but I can't resist, and I don't want to usurp the role of our moderator, but I have been paying very close attention, and I'm getting a little concerned that if we employ some of these recommendations, we are not going to have counties in New Jersey. We're going to do away with local mayors. We're doing away with school boards, politicians at all levels, developers, and we're going to force people to make a very difficult choice between paying a toll and having a slice of pizza. So I do have a concern about the direction we're going in so far. On the other hand, we are in favor of greening the state, but I think the Republicans out there voted for that just any color but blue. So that's my quick interim assessment to help you out, all right? I know that's on my time, so I'll talk fast. In the midst of the current economic doom and gloom, I have some good news. When it comes to public education, New Jersey is already the best in the nation. Test scores are up. Reading and math scores are among the nation's best. New Jersey schools score the highest, number one in the nation, in how well we prepare students for college and the workforce. New Jersey's public high school graduation rate is also the highest in the country. You don't see this information sometimes in our media. That's why I'm pointing it out. So you see, we have a lot to be proud of, but we can't just be satisfied with our past accomplishments. We must constantly strive to improve. Great public schools don't come cheap. Our public schools are successful because New Jersey invests a lot of money in public education. We also rank number one in the nation in per-pupil expenditures. It's sort of like you get what you pay for. To keep the public schools performing, we must continue to invest in them. However, the current tax structure in New Jersey is not the way to do it. Let me share some interesting statistics with you. More than 60 cents of every education dollar in New Jersey comes from property taxes. Nationally, that figure is less than 44 cents. Across the nation, public schools receive 47% of their revenue from state government. In New Jersey, the state funding is only 37%. New Jersey ranks 5th in the nation for the share of its school revenue provided by property taxes and 41st in the nation for the share coming from state government. You see a pattern there, all right? So even though our public schools are the best in the nation, the way we fund them is just about the worst system in the nation. Fortunately, New Jerseyans value education and have supported our public schools in very difficult times and when it's hit them very hard in the wallet. New Jersey voters continue to pass school budgets at a very high rate, the highest passage rate in the nation. I have a bulletin. We have a real financial mess in this state. And at this moment, there doesn't seem to be anything going on that would cause one to think that it's going to get much better soon. Actually, I can't see your sign, so I'm sorry. 1 minute. Okay. Because we have high debt, high fixed expenses, and inadequate revenue, New Jersey finds itself struggling every year to put together a bare-bones budget. The mantra, both in the media and in the State House, is, what can we do to cut this year to get a balanced budget? That may be a good way to function in the short term, but that has gotten us to exactly the place we are in the long term. It's kind of like with a car. You might be a little short on money, so you don't put the oil in this month. If you continue to do that, eventually you're going to pay for a new engine. In New Jersey, our check engine light is on, and we are a couple of quarts low already. We need to invest in our infrastructure and our bridges, and we need to invest in our schools, our crumbling schools, and our urban centers. This is not a time to shy away. This is not a time to cut our way out of this economic crisis. This is a time to invest our way out of our economic crisis. The best part you're not going to hear, see me at lunch.
Stay here. All right, so first you're going to see him at lunch. By the way, we're abbreviating lunch because we're running late. So you're going to have to eat lunch and talk about this stuff with Vince. I think if I had to boil it down, I would just say that the actionable item would be a general call for more investment now in infrastructure, including schools, as opposed to cutting it back because times are tough. So
thereby creating jobs and driving the economy and not just trying to cut our way down out of the economy.
Vince is going for my job.
Sorry.
He's got the attempts at humor down. Now he's going for the substantive stuff too. All right, so we're going to invest now. We're not going to cut back on investment. That is the plan. If you're in favor of that approach, you give it a 5. You can go down the ladder to 1. And survey says, Scott? Okay, you want to invest. Thanks, Vince.
Not bad.
Our next speaker is the president of Sunbank, Tom Geisel. Morning, Tom.
Morning.
You want? Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to be here this afternoon. There's been a lot of great ideas this morning, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more this afternoon. So I thought I would take a little bit of a different tact here and provoke some thought. So tell me if any of these attributes sound familiar to you. Out-of-control property taxes, out-of-control spending, rising taxes in an effort to cover spending and programs that can't be afforded, economic burdens on industry and trade, projects that are too large to manage with cost overruns, large government, political corruption, not enough focus on the new economy and new methodologies, decaying infrastructure of roads, bridges, and harbors, municipalities, towns, and individuals having a me and mine mentality versus a greater good, and people and businesses relocating to neighboring areas. Does this sound familiar to any of you? Sounds like New Jersey, right? Well, it isn't. I'm describing the Roman Empire before it fell, and many of the traits that contributed to its fall. At its height, the Roman Empire was both feared and revered for its military power and economic stability. The emperor directly controlled coinage, taxation, and his own estates, but otherwise allowed the economy to operate freely with demand dictating prices and profits. But as the empire grew and demands on the state expounded, emperors became selfish and it became too big to manage. The state needed to sustain a huge government, military, and transportation infrastructure and provide for more than 50 million subjects spread out around 2.3 million square miles. Taxes continued to rise to a point where the average person couldn't afford to even be a citizen of Rome. And dollars were not always spent wisely, sometimes going to support games at the Colosseum, statues to adorn the city streets, or one individual's pet projects. A lot of local communities turned within to trade and barter amongst themselves versus traveling around the cities. Everyone became focused on themselves. Money didn't hold its value, and as it got worse, citizens, including farmers and business owners, fled the empire for neighboring territories to find relief. It's interesting, isn't it, to see the parallels from this grand empire that fell because of some of the same conditions that exist today here in New Jersey. Now, I'm not a pessimist. I love New Jersey. I grew up here. I relocated back here. My business is here, and I don't think New Jersey is going to fall. But I do think we need to look closely and learn from history and the paths that led to economic collapses like Rome. The times and circumstances are certainly different, but I challenge all of us as we sit here today to consider the details of history as we look and analyze some of these new ideas and chart a path for the future. We need to work together to make the tough decisions. It's time to start thinking about each other and not ourselves. After all, who would have thought Wall Street would cease to exist as we knew it just 1 year ago? Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. All right. If I were going to be facetious, I would ask you to vote on public art and say that we're not going to have funding for No, just kidding. I think that's a provocative and interesting way to look at where we are, and it creates an interesting parallel for you to reflect on, but not something we're going to vote on. So thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Tanisha Nash Laird. She is the Executive Director of the Trenton Downtown Association. Come on, Tanisha.
First, I want to thank you all for letting me be here. I'm a relatively last-minute addition, as in I found out this morning that I'm on the agenda today. I wanted to sort of divide up my remarks into two areas in terms of land use and transportation. A lot of what I was going to say was already talked about, so I'll talk from a more personal perspective. I came to the city of Trenton 3 years ago as the director of the Division of Economic Development, and that position came with a residency requirement. I wanted to live in an urban area in the city, and I was very surprised by the lack of living opportunities in the city. I guess what I noticed as also becoming the director of the Division of Housing Production, that there lacked a number of incentives for developing in the city for market rate development, and as well as for what we call workforce housing. There are a number of, as you know, with RCAs, there were a number of opportunities to do affordable, and I think affordable housing is very important. But we talked about diversity here. There was a person that talked about diversity. I think socioeconomic diversity in urban areas is very important as well. And so I guess my first proposal would be about coming up with programs to encourage redevelopment in urban areas and incentives for that, for market rate development. The Second thing that that happened is that I became aware that economic development, growth and development programs, such as the Urban Enterprise Zone program, to which the governor appointed me a board member earlier this year, come with I call them strings attached. In other words, if you accept that Urban Enterprise Zone money, whether it's for a facade program that they're looking at right now or much larger programs, you have to use prevailing wage, which again sort of becomes a disincentive for developing in the city. Talking about transportation, as you all know, the Urban Transit Hub Zone Tax Credit Program passed earlier this year, and although many people believe that it was actually passed for one potential tenant, I view it as an opportunity for us to look at that and get all of the urban centers together to create an urban alliance to attract more, I call national potential employers to urban centers. What's behind all of this is that I realized when I came to the city of Trenton that there was a lack of consolidation, there was a lack of cooperative proposals amongst urban centers. When Governor Corzine presented his first budget in brief, I noticed in the economic growth and development area that he talked about a number of programs to do infrastructure building. It was very clear that these were more suburban and green field area type development. In other words, putting in new roads. Well, if you're talking about coming to urban centers, we already have roads. What we need are more incentives for people to come to the cities and do redevelopment. As greenfield development became more and more difficult, a number of developers who used to be in that area and home builders that used to be in that area started looking at urban centers, and they were very surprised by the lack of incentives, by the lack of resources, by the lack of funding, frankly, that was available for them to do development in the city. So I guess being sort of the urban person here at the podium, I think if we look at all of these programs and look how we can, in addition to spurring redevelopment around the transit hubs for large-scale businesses, we need to look at the redevelopment opportunities to create homes in those areas as well. I was told my time is up. Thank you.
Stay here.
All right. Number one, incentives for market rate development. That would, I think.
In urban areas.
In urban areas.
To create socioeconomic diversity.
All right. You guys good with that? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Okay. And then the second part I would put this way. If you take the urban transit hub zone concept for large-scale employers, you would like us to apply it to home building.
Sort of. Yeah.
Okay. Say it better.
Well, what I was really trying to say is that we need to also, instead of, what I've noticed is a lot of the new proposals to go around these places become sort of islands. There's very little looking at the surrounding neighborhoods, many of which have potential redevelopment opportunities with older housing stock, but with those incentives there for builders to go in and redevelop it. You know, that tax credit program should be tied to something within the neighborhoods as well.
All right. I'm going to say residential redevelopment tied to the hub concept. All right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, vote. Okay. You got high scores. All right. Next on the list is the person who probably has the reputation, at least as I view it, of being the most candid person to come out of state government in eons. He is now the executive director of the Casino Reinvestment Development Authority, Tom Carver.
I'm not sure that's good or bad, by the way, but I think it's, speaking of our future, if we're going to have one, I think we have to get serious. I believe the following. I believe this is a great state. I think we have natural assets, our location and our tremendous workforce. I think they have to be used intelligently. I think our government has to be proactive. I didn't say big, I said proactive. I believe that people in government like myself are given moments in time. We have an obligation, a primary obligation, to tell the people the truth. If not us, who? We must tell the people the truth. One of the things I think we have to do is I think we have to reject out of hands, or at least challenge, really challenge, the nonsense when political candidates of whatever party stand up and say, I'm going to lower your taxes, I'm going to provide services, and I'm going to find waste, fraud, and abuse in government to do it. That's nonsense. And it's about time somebody said it was nonsense. It's about time we started to stop swallowing Kool-Aid and understand where we are. Jack, I have 3 people in the room, by the way. 2 are here, 1 isn't any longer, who I have great admiration for, because I thought they had, and do think, they have the audacity to tell the people, they have had the audacity to tell the people the truth. And that's former governors Byrne and Florio. They told the people the truth. Jack Latia, who works with me on a daily basis as a consultant, is a visionary. And we debate the future constantly. I'm going to make some specific recommendations, if I may, at the end, and I'll try to go as quickly as I can. I believe the following. We can and we will. Very simply. There's not an issue raised today that this room, the people in this room, do not have the collective power to make change. Change is here in this room. It's not down the street. And I say that with due respect. It's here. It's in the people to make change. We can do that. We are developing a plan in southern New Jersey, a master plan for transportation for the next 25 years. It doesn't go as far as I had hoped because, frankly, we don't have the money or the time to get into the detail. But it's a beginning. It's a beginning. We will announce a holistic plan through the governor in the near future, combining the issue of housing, workforce housing, transportation, and planning and land use. We must do this. If we do not invest in our infrastructure, we will not have a future because we will not function. It's that simple. This isn't a matter of debate. We must do this. We must have the willpower so we don't continue to lose our way. Specifically, our plan, when it's announced, is going to be controversial. It already is. If you read today's editorial in the Atlantic City Press, you know how controversial some of the things that we recommend are. However, we're going to be recommending specifically a menu of items to pay for transportation infrastructure. Tolls, transportation trust fund, public-private partnerships, a portion of tax increases when they come, and they will come, a portion dedicated community, county, state to transportation. And specifically, I used to make speeches when I was Commissioner of Labor, and Jack and I were in the cabinet, about raising the gas tax, which I believed in. But let me throw out an alternate idea for you. A gas stabilization program in which when the gas price goes down, we keep a penny, we keep 2 pennies based on formulas. I'd make it retroactive today. And I'd go back and I'd recoup almost a dime from the decrease in prices in the past month and a half. A dime for our transportation trust fund would do wonders. First of all, stop borrowing. We have got to be realistic. We've got to make judgments. We've got to tell each other the truth, and we must act. Carpe diem. We have that privilege and opportunity every single day. Seize the day. Thank you.
You're in favor of carpe diem? No. All right. Dedication of a percentage of tax increases to transportation at the community, the county, and the state level would be one. So a dedicated percentage going to transportation. Is that a fair extraction, Tom? All right. So you're in favor of that. 5, down the scale to 1. Vote. Survey says. Okay. Then gas prices go down. We keep a penny or 2 or some percentage. I'm not sure how to phrase that in an actionable way, but you get the idea. So if you like that, it's a 5. If you don't like that, you're down the scale to 1. Vote. All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Veronica Vanterpool. She is the Associate Director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Here.
Good afternoon. Smart, sustainable transportation policies will help progress New Jersey. There have been some troubling transportation trends, many of which have already been discussed this morning, that continue New Jersey's cycle of debt and borrowing. But there are ways to keep New Jersey moving forward. But the troubling trends first. Raiding the Transportation Trust Fund. When this fund was established, it was intended to finance infrastructure repair and new mass transit. But in the early 90s, lawmakers allowed the New Jersey Department of Transportation to charge engineering costs and salaries against the fund. And as a result, the fund is projected to be bankrupt in 2011. Troubling trend number 2, the lack of will to raise the gas tax. Currently, the gas tax is 10.5 cents, which is the third lowest in the country. Adjusted for inflation, that's about 6 cents today, and it has not been raised since 1988. The gas tax and revenue from the gas tax could be a valuable funding stream that could be dedicated to mass transit. Third trend, there's a lack of a dedicated revenue stream for mass transit operations. New Jersey Transit is the largest transit agency in the country without a dedicated source of operating funds. As a result, transit companies like New Jersey Transit must institute fare hikes, and that disproportionately burdens low-income bus riders in places like Trenton and Newark. Fourth troubling trend, the widening of roads as a solution to traffic congestion. Contrary to what many people think, road widenings do not ease traffic congestion in the long term. New Jersey DOT understands this. Through its fix-it-first approach, capital dollars have decreased from the early 1990s from 50% going toward road expansions to 1.5% today. We need to have that vision and that approach translate to New Jersey Turnpike Authority. There are more innovative and costly ways of easing traffic congestion, such as HLT lanes, an expanded mass transit system, stronger incentives for variable tolling, and a freight management corridor. Now moving on to some solutions. Invest in public transportation facilities. This stimulates more job growth than building new roads and bridges. For every $1.2 billion invested, over 51,000 jobs will be created. Revive smart growth projects from New Jersey FIT. The NJ FIT program became a national model for progressive transportation policies, but a number of its projects now lay dormant, like the teardown of Trenton's Route 29. We also need to increase expenditures for bike and pedestrian spending. Municipal demand for bike and pedestrian funds is outpacing available monies by a margin of 10 to 1. We need to revitalize urban cities. New Jersey's recent package of the Urban Transit Hub tax credit, which was mentioned earlier, is a good start. But we need to have greater transit expansion and development in cities like Trenton, Newark, and Camden. And we need to find innovative methods to pay for transportation improvements and not be afraid to toll new roads. These are sources and ways to generate money that can be applied and dedicated to mass transit. And New Jersey is not the only state that is trying to find ways of financing its infrastructure and its transportation projects. Thank you.
Okay. Stay here, Veronica. Investment in public transportation, I think we've been there on that one. Revive the smart growth planning policies from New Jersey FIT. You want to vote on that one? Let's vote on that one. I don't know what they are, so I'll leave it to you to figure out what they are. But you're smart, so if you're in favor of that, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the usual scale. We won't go to yes, no. So vote. And, okay, so we want New Jersey FIT those policies back. More money for bike and pedestrian stuff, infrastructure, whatever. Improvements, yes, thank you. The vocabulary escaped me. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on bike and pedestrian improvements. Okay. Tolling new roads. That's a little bit of a gross way of phrasing it, but I think you get the idea. So you're in favor of that concept? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Answer is? Whoa. Okay. All right. There are other things like, increasing the gas tax, rating the trans. I think we sort of covered those earlier. Thank you very much, Veronica. Next person on the list is the president of Rowan University, Don Farish. And while Don is making his way up, I would remind you that the biographies for all of these people, everybody on today's program, I think almost without exception, you can find out all about them by looking at the biographical glob that you got on the way in. Don.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I don't know that I've got a whole lot new to add. I listened to the discussion going on today. It does strike me that we eventually reach the point where we are repeating the same mantras to each other. But I want to make this observation. I've lived in 6 different states. My parents did not have the wisdom to locate in New Jersey before I was born. In fact, they even missed the country. I was born in Canada. But the virtue that comes from having lived in a lot of places is that I've heard some of these discussions before. And I must say that in the 10 years that I've lived, 10 plus years now in New Jersey, I've never heard another state that is as constantly on the issue of how is it that we fund the services that we want. And I watch the state budget coming together each year, and it's like watching a size 14 foot being squeezed into a size 12 shoe. I use big numbers because these are big numbers. And we usually do it by cutting off a toe. And in higher education, we're the little toe. So we tend to go a lot, and I need to do this just once, the observation that in between fiscal years 2005 and 2007, 49 states increased funding for public higher education by an average of 15%. Only one state lowered funding for public higher education, and that was quadruple A Jersey. So now I have said that, the problem we've got is it's very hard to talk about adding new toes when there's not enough space in the shoe already to fit what we already have. And that's one of the things that's frustrating. So where I sit, it's a matter of standing well back from the situation. And let me run the following analogy with you. Let's suppose that we consider every state to be a family. And every family has a family car, and that's state and local government. And so all kinds of different cars. We need them to be able to get back and forth to work, and we're always comparing to see who has which car. New Jersey has an aging Hummer, and we're finding that it's expensive to maintain. It gets us back and forth, but we think there must be better ways of getting this thing done. We're putting off certain things that need to be done. We're not changing the oil as often as we should. It probably needs a new transmission. Every once in a while we come up with an idea. Maybe if we put a little more air in the tires, we can get a little more mileage. The fact is we've got a Hummer. We need a new car. So we go to Consumer Reports and find out, well, what are the best cars? This is Joan Verplancke's point from earlier today. What we start with is not a constitutional convention, in my view. What we start with is a plan. We have a blue ribbon commission looking at best practices from all the states. And we ask the question, let's start talking metrics. Let's make decisions based on data rather than surmise. Let's not do one thing at a time and hope that we squeeze the bubble here and it doesn't blow up someplace else. Let's look at this more holistically. And we collect the data that we need in order to be able to make the decisions we have to make. Now, in doing that, it's a pretty innocent process going in. No one is committed to anything because everything's on the table ready to be looked at. Once we do this in an open and transparent way, the media is in all the meetings that we have it well represented from across the state. But we get this job done. I realize these kinds of things have been done before, but we need to get some data in place so that we can make the decisions that need to be made so this state continues to be the prosperous state that we've come to know and love. Not a new idea, but one I think that we have to talk about first before we can talk about what other practices and benefits that we should be adding to our plate. Thank you.
Right. We could vote on either bigger shoes or fewer toes, but we know where that gets us. So I would say, though, and it does go back to what Joan said, but let's just take that Blue Ribbon Commission idea and we'll just do it one more time, kind of the metrics-based data gathering, which leads us to be able to quantify the impact of best practices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just, you guys are shifting during the day. People are coming and going. People weren't here this morning when we, welcome to Beijing to our international live streaming conference. So if you're in favor of that notion, the Blue Ribbon Commission concept, I know that it's easy to react to that like, just another commission, but the sort of metrics-based or the data-based concept of what best practices would be. You're a 5. If you're not, you're a 1. You're voting. And, all right, so we're basically at 73. Thanks, Don. Next person on the list is Paul Scully. He is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Regional Coalition.
Okay. Thanks. In New Jersey, there's a lot of talk about cooperation, consolidation, unifying our communities, creating more regional structures. But we think that we need more policies. Our policies actually tend to encourage disunity, competition, and fragmentation. And so what I want to lay out is some of the policies that we think will actually do more to encourage unity, diversity, and stability. Number one, similar to what we worked on this past year, or actually last year, on school funding, but on fiscal policy, school funding and state aid, we think should be based on demographics and based on housing. It should support and reinforce diversity and stability. So it should take in consideration the diversity of a community, the social diversity, as well as the tax capacity of a community. 2, on affordable housing policy should put the greatest burden on the communities with the most capacity and jobs. Right now, our affordable housing policy tends to treat all communities the same, especially all suburbs. So we say, similar to what they did or attempted to do in Minnesota, they had a policy called the worst go first. Those towns that have the greatest capacity and have done the least in affordable housing, there must be more pressure on them. And on the other side, take more pressure off those towns that actually have the most diverse housing stocks and the most diverse populations. So the worst go first. On infrastructure, first of all, we think we should support and promote our federal bailout or recovery or reinvestment opportunities that are being debated now in Washington to move down the food chain from the financial sector to the banks and then actually down to the ground where we're actually investing in real communities, real jobs, real infrastructure. And that includes transportation, but also includes sewers, stormwaters, roads. And we think that that kind of investment needs to be done on a regional scale in all cases, and it needs to consider what the differences of communities. In Michigan, they had a policy called Fix It First. That is, that investment would go to places that are older, that are built out, that are more diverse and more developed, versus places that are newer and growing. So, to sum it up, those policies would be on fiscal policy, school funding, and municipal aid, reward diversity and density. 2, housing policy, the worst go first. And 3, infrastructure, fix it first, based on a regional plan. How's that?
That's good. Stay here. Stay here. I love guys who give them labels. It makes it so much easier. All right, so the first is we're going to reward diversity and density. I'm not going to repeat all the other stuff, so you got the basic notion there from Paul. You're in favor of that concept? 5 down to 1. Vote. Survey says. All right. Second, with respect to affordable housing, put the burden on the communities with the most capacity, or, in the interesting way that Paul phrased it, the worst go first. If you're in favor of that notion, you're at a 5, down the ladder to 1. You're voting, and the survey says you like worst to first. And finally, in terms of the whole trickle-down theory of the support for the bailout, down the food chain, banks, down to real jobs and infrastructure, doing it on a regional scale, fix it first. You like that notion as Paul explained it, you're at a 5. You want to go down the scale? While you're voting, I will tell you, as soon as I heard about the bailout, I sent Hank Paulson a note saying I would like to be at the end of the bailout list. I haven't heard from him yet, but I'm hoping that he'll get back to me because I think it could be the answer. All right. Fix it first. Got even higher than worst to first. All right, thanks, Paul.
Sure.
And finally, here, let me tell you where we are sort of in terms of the day. We have one more speaker in the morning glob. Then we were going to have a brief time for lunch. We're about 15 minutes behind schedule. So what's going to happen is you're going to grab your lunch from the Community Food Bank of New Jersey folks over there. You're going to return to your table, or you're going to go do whatever you wanted to do during that break. So if that involves restrooms, telephone calls returned, whatever. But we will limit that to about 7 minutes. And then we're going to start the panel, which will be introduced by Ann Lindberg from Bank of America, which will be moderated by Kent Manahan from NJN, which will include Governors Florio and Byrne, as well as Chris Daggett, Roland, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce Roland's last name, Mackold. So there we are. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to try to move along. You've been very indulgent in terms of staying with the pace. So we have one more speaker in the first round, and that would be Stephen Sachs-Wilner from Capitol Public Affairs, former head of the State Planning Commission. Then directly to lunch.
Good afternoon. My premise is that New Jersey's broke, and we ought to fix it. The question is, will we become a third-rate state, or will we reinvent ourselves again as the location for innovation? We have an affordability crisis in this state. It's good news for our competing states. Our residents are deserting the state due to high costs, especially the outrageous housing costs, and the increased commuting costs now. And as this occurs, our buying power declines, our economy shrinks, the tax income shrinks and must be raised, our national political influence declines, and our highly vaunted workforce that keeps business here wants to leave. How long is this kind of downward spiral sustainable? The ills of this state are much bigger than the state budget. In fact, the budget is merely a symptom of the ills. It's kind of like a car's idiot light on the state's economic dashboard. We have no meaningful housing policy or education policy. They're set largely by the judiciary, which is the least democratic branch of government, and the one with the weakest structure for setting policy. The cost of living here is driving residents out in rapid numbers. We're losing our workforce. We need a statewide housing policy, and we need a real school policy. We're seeing at this point, I believe, the Europeanization of our housing patterns. In Europe, gas prices have been near $10 for a decade. People are going to be moving closer and closer to transit. But we don't have a policy, a housing policy, that really encourages building housing closer to transit. In fact, our real policy is quite the opposite, despite what we say. While conceptually most people support the concept of living close to transit, they don't support the idea in practice. And the reason is our tax structure. Our tax structure needs a major overhaul. It mandates a municipal policy that is against educating our children. I'm going to repeat that. We have a policy against educating children. Of course, we're all in favor of giving our kids the best education, and in fact, we heard from Vinnie Donofrio that they're getting it. But to simplify, if it costs $10,000 to educate a child, and if a home has 2 children, and they're paying $10,000 in property taxes, every new house means a tax increase. And local planning boards and local officials don't want to mandate a tax increase. Towns don't want to zone for additional housing, and this is directly counter to any solutions we may need to keep our cost of living down, our workforce in place, our corporate presence stable, our tax ratables high, and property taxes low. School funding has to radically change. Funding our public schools has to be done more with local property taxes, as Vinnie Donofrio said. This is a big part of what's making New Jersey unaffordable. We need a fundamental shift, and while politically it may be unpopular, as I'm sure Governor Florio recalls, we may need to raise the state income tax and use it to fund the schools. We also need to revitalize our cities. We need to make smart growth and transit-oriented growth possible through a revised and transformed statewide tax policy. We need a revamped and decisive public policy that attracts and retains corporate presence in our state, using both our high-quality workforce and our reformed affordable housing policies, and a business incentive program that at least competes with states like Pennsylvania and North Carolina, where people are moving to. And thus, while we may have to live with a little bit higher property income taxes, our reduced property tax base will yield higher ratables, making New Jersey affordable to all by retaining our high-quality workforce and increasing our corporate retention. I'm going to just take a little bit more time because I want to paint this picture a little more starkly, statistics. I'm going to give a little Einstein's Alley presentation here. There you go.
In that case, hit the bell again.
Okay.
All right. Raise the income tax. You are in favor of that?
To fund school education.
To fund education. Raise the income tax to fund education. Somebody look over Governor Florio's shoulder and just see how he's voting on this one, please. Okay? All right, you're voting, and the answer is, all right. That's one of the most polarized responses we've had this morning. Increase the business incentive programs in New Jersey so they are at least competitive with those offered by Pennsylvania and North Carolina. You're in favor of that, or you're down the scale toward one? You're voting. Survey says. Okay. You are in favor of a statewide housing policy. You are voting. Survey says. Okay, there's a distribution that's interesting. And I'll give you one more. It doesn't come out exactly as something to vote on, but the whole concept that Stephen was talking about the Europeanization of sort of how we live. If you think that's a good notion whose time has come, vote 5 and go down the scale. Yeah.
Transit village, having clusters of population density, and saving the green areas as green.
You're voting, and the survey says, all right, you like that idea. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
All right, so that outrageous suggestion I made to you, which is now it's restroom time, it's cell phone time, it's grab your box lunch time, it's come back to your table by 3 minutes before 1 o'clock, and we will begin the Kent Manahan Florio Byrne panel.